Saul, David, Solomon, we three kings of Israel. My name is Adam, and we are continuing in the life of Solomon as he begins his reign. Where we left off before was 1 Kings chapter 2, and in verse 12 it says, "So Solomon sat on the throne of David his father, and his kingdom was firmly established." And what we're about to read about through the rest of chapter 2 is the way that his kingdom was firmly established. David has passed away. It is Saul's time now. And we start in verse 13. Then Adonijah, the son of Haggith, came to Bathsheba, the mother of Solomon. Adonijah, remember, was the one who tried to take the throne as David was sick. He was ill. Adonijah came in. David didn't know about it. And David then set up Saul with the urging of Bathsheba and Nathan. David set up Solomon with the urging of Bathsheba and Nathan, the prophet. And so at any rate, Adonijah is spared at that point. But he comes to Bathsheba, the mother of Solomon, and she said, "Do you come peacefully?" You know, he kind of had it out for them at the time. He said, "Peacefully." Then he said, "I have something to say to you." She said, "Speak." He said, "You know that the kingdom was mine, and that all Israel fully expected me to reign. However, the kingdom has turned about and become my brother's, for it was his from the Lord. And now I have one request to make of you. Do not refuse me." She said to him, "Speak." And he said, "Please ask King Solomon, he will not refuse you, to give me Abishag, the Shunammite, as my wife." Bathsheba said, "Very well, I will speak for you to the king." Remember, Abishag was the young woman, most beautiful woman in all the nation that they could find, that they wanted to come in and keep David warm. Keep him warm, because he couldn't get warm. So David had established his reputation, partly through Bathsheba, of gathering wives and young women and concubines, and that was, kind of what he did. Oh my. And then Solomon will not fall far from the tree in that respect, but for all intents and purposes, Abishag was David's young woman. Bathsheba, who knows, maybe she wasn't very happy about that anyway, and so she says, "Very well, I will speak for you to the king." So, verse 19, Bathsheba went to King Solomon to speak to him on behalf of Adonijah. And the king rose to meet her and bowed down to her. Solomon bows down to his mother. Solomon still respects his mother. It's interesting, if you look at Proverbs 31, what do you see? You see King Lemuel is what it says, but it's another name for Solomon. And what we see is that it is an oracle that his mother taught him. Proverbs 31, the Proverbs 31 woman, right? That is an oracle that his mother taught him. Solomon very much respected her and listened to her. So he rose to meet her and bowed down to her. Then he sat on his throne and had a seat brought for the king's mother, and she sat on his right. That was also a symbol of power, sitting at the right hand of the king. Then she said, "I have one small request to make of you. Do not refuse me." And the king said to her, "Make your request, mother, for I will not refuse you." Then she said, "Let Abishag the Shunammite be given to Adonijah your brother as his wife." King Solomon answered his mother, "And why do you ask Abishag the Shunammite for Adonijah? Ask for him the kingdom also, for he is my older brother, and on his side are Abiathar the priest and Joab the son of Zeruiah." Then King Solomon swore by the Lord, saying, "God do so to me and more also, if this word does not cost Adonijah his life." Remember, he told Adonijah, "You do well, you'll live. You do wicked, if wicked is found in you, you will die. Now therefore, as the Lord lives, who has established me and placed me on the throne of David my father, and who has made me a house as he promised, Adonijah shall be put to death today." So King Solomon sent Benaiah, the son of Jehoiada, and he struck him down, and he died. And to Abiathar the priest the king said, "Go to Anathoth, to your estate, for you deserve death. But I will not at this time put you to death, because you carried the ark of the Lord God before David my father, and because you shared in all my father's affliction." So Solomon expelled Abiathar from being priest to the Lord, thus fulfilling the word of the Lord that he had spoken concerning the house of Eli and Shiloh. Remember, Eli, because he would not punish his sons. He wouldn't take care of the problem that they had, or that they were even in the priesthood. God said, your house will be removed from being priest to me. Hophni and Phinehas, they were killed in battle. We learned that. Eli keeled over and he died when he learned of them and the ark being taken. And we saw that his house, much of the house of Eli, was also put to death when David went to the priests and lied to them and then got the bread from the priest at that time. And then Saul came, I believe it was Doeg, who killed all the priests there, except Abiathar escaped. And now, finally, this fulfillment has come in full. Seems to us like it would be a long time, right? Because remember, from the time that David began to reign to when he died, it was 40 years. And then even more than that beforehand when Eli was told that all of his household was not going to be priests anymore. Seems like a long time to us, but to the Lord, 1,000 years is like a day, and a day is like 1,000 years. So this is not a short time to him. The punishment has come. Verse 28, when the news came to Joab, for Joab had supported Adonijah, although he had not supported Absalom, Joab fled to the tent of the Lord and caught hold of the horns of the altar. I'd say he didn't support Absalom because he killed Absalom. And when it was told King Solomon, Joab has fled to the tent of the Lord, and behold, he is beside the altar, Solomon sent Benaiah the son of Jehoiada, saying, go, strike him down. So Benaiah came to the tent of the Lord and said to him, the king commands, come out. But he said, no, I will die here. Then Benaiah brought the king word again, saying, thus said Joab, and thus he answered me. The king replied to him, do as he said. Strike him down and bury him, and thus take away from me and from my father's house the guilt for the blood that Joab has shed without cause. The Lord will bring back his bloody deeds on his own head, because without the knowledge of my father David, he attacked and killed with the sword 2 men more righteous and better than himself, Abner the son of Ner, commander of the army of Israel, and Amasa the son of Jether, commander of the army of Judah. So shall their blood come back on the head of Joab and on the head of his descendants forever. But for David and for his descendants and for his house and for his throne, there shall be peace from the Lord forevermore. Bit of a prophetic word, especially when Jesus came, right? 34, then Benaiah the son of Jehoiada went up and struck him down and put him to death. And he was buried in his own house in the wilderness. The king put Benaiah the son of Jehoiada over the army in place of Joab, and the king put Zadok the priest in the place of Abiathar. Then the king sent and summoned Shimei and said to him, build yourself a house in Jerusalem and dwell there, and do not go out from there to any place whatever, for on the day you go out and cross the brook Kidron, know for certain that you will die. Your blood will be on your own head. And Shimei said to the king, what you say is good. As my lord the king has said, so will your servant do. So Shimei lived in Jerusalem many days. Solomon gave him a border, clear instructions. Remember, he gave Adonijah clear instructions as well, right? Adonijah said, promise me that you will spare me. And Solomon said, I'm not going to promise you that. I'm going to tell you, if you do well, you're fine. You have nothing to fear. If wicked is found in you, then you will surely die. Shimei as well was given boundaries, and he was told, if you follow these rules, you will do fine. If you do not, you will surely die. So, moving on, Shimei lived in Jerusalem many days, verse 39. But it happened at the end of 3 years that 2 of Shimei's servants ran away to Achish, son of Maacah, king of Gath. And when it was told Shimei, behold, your servants are in Gath, Shimei arose and saddled a donkey and went to Gath to Achish to seek his servants. Shimei went and brought his servants from Gath. And when Solomon was told that Shimei had gone from Jerusalem to Gath and returned, the king sent and summoned Shimei and said to him, did I not make you swear by the Lord and solemnly warn you, saying, know for certain that on the day you go out and go to any place whatever, you shall die? And you said to me, what you say is good, I will obey. Why then have you not kept your oath to the Lord and the commandment with which I commanded you. The king also said to Shimei, you know in your own heart all the harm that you did to David my father, so the Lord will bring back your harm on your own head. Remember, Shimei was the one who was throwing the rocks and cursing David, and he would rather have had, at that time, was it Ishbosheth? No, it was someone else. Absalom, maybe? At any rate, he was of Saul's house, I believe, and then he did not want David to be king. So he cursed him and made their road hard and very weary. So verse 45, but King Solomon shall be blessed, and the throne of David shall be established before the Lord forever. There goes that third person thing again. Then the king commanded Benaiah the son of Jehoiada, and he went out and struck him down, and he died. So the kingdom was established in the hand of Solomon. It's that literary device again at the beginning of it. He said the kingdom was established in the hand of Solomon, and then here is a little bit of that explanation of how that happened. And then he goes on to say, so the kingdom was established in the hand of Solomon. And now we are in chapter 3. A very interesting chapter. There's a lot here, with a little bit being said, but there's a lot in it. So verse 1 of chapter 3, Solomon made a marriage alliance with Pharaoh, king of Egypt. He took Pharaoh's daughter and brought her into the city of David until he had finished building his own house and the house of the Lord and the wall around Jerusalem. The people were sacrificing at the high places, however, because no house had yet been built for the name of the Lord. Solomon loved the Lord, walking in the statutes of David his father, only he sacrificed and made offerings at the high places. So right from the start, what we see is that Solomon is marrying outside of Israel. Now, this was a marriage alliance, right? I mean, this was something to join the two kingdoms, Israel and Egypt. And we know how that worked out in the end, but this was a marriage alliance. And it did work out. It worked out very peacefully for Solomon throughout his reign. However, he still married a foreign woman. They were commanded not to do that. Solomon loved many foreign women. And if I say Saul, I don't know if I'm saying Saul or Solomon. Just know I mean Solomon at this point. I mean the king who is actually alive still, right? I'll misspeak quite often. But we see right off the bat he's marrying foreign women. We find out that he loves foreign women. He ends up following after a lot of their customs, a lot of their gods. He loves God. He believes and he trusts in God. He walks in the statutes of David, his father. He sacrifices and makes offerings at the high places. In this case, it may be only to God that he's making sacrifices and not to foreign gods at this time. But the point is, he's not making the sacrifices in the temple as he was instructed to do. So we already see some of this compromise coming in to Solomon right off the bat. In verse 4, the king went to Gibeon to sacrifice there, for that was the great high place. Solomon used to offer 1,000 burnt offerings on that altar. At Gibeon, the Lord appeared to Solomon in a dream by night, and God said, ask what I shall give you. It's interesting, isn't it? God still appears to him in a dream, despite the fact that he's not doing the right thing, but he loves God, and he does trust God. He has faith in God. He is walking in David's ways. He still has that heart that is after the Lord. Verse 6, Solomon said, you have shown great and steadfast love to your servant David, my father, because he walked before you in faithfulness and righteousness and in uprightness of heart toward you, and you have kept for him this great and steadfast love, and have given him a son to sit on his throne this day. And now, O Lord my God, you have made your servant king in place of David my father, although I am but a little child. I do not know how to go out or to come in, and your servant is in the midst of your people whom you have chosen, a great people, too many to be numbered or counted for multitude. Give your servant, therefore, an understanding mind to govern your people, that I may discern between good and evil, for who is able to govern this, your great people? It pleased the Lord that Solomon had asked this, and God said to him, because you have asked this, and have not asked for yourself long life or riches or the life of your enemies, but have asked for yourself understanding to discern what is right, behold, I now do according to your word Behold, I give you a wise and discerning mind, so that none like you has been before, and none like you shall arise after you. I give you also what you have not asked, both riches and honor, so that no other king shall compare with you all your days. And if you will walk in my ways, keeping my statutes and my commandments, as your father David walked, then I will lengthen your days. Understand this. This promise is to Solomon, okay? If we ask for wisdom, God does not promise, he promises that he will give us wisdom if we ask him and trust and believe that he will do so. But he doesn't promise that he's going to give us riches and honor, and long life and et cetera, right? It's a very curious thing because I think a lot of people, well, let me put it this way. I know I've done it before, right? Oh, so if I get riches and honor, I just need to ask God for wisdom. I'll ask God for wisdom that he knows our hearts, right? He already discerns that and knows our minds. Another interesting thing here where he says, then I will lengthen your days. There is fairly recently, depending on when you're watching this, a scandal that has come out of a very famous apologist, Ravi Zacharias, who has passed away already, and sexual sin that he was involved with. I read that line, I will lengthen your days, and know what Solomon did and how he fell. Sexual sin is what did him in as well, right? Falling in love with foreign women and following women that he shouldn't have and never getting control of that. It appears that Ravi never got control of it either. You see that. You see the punishment that he told Eli was coming and how long it took for him, really how patient he had been with Eli's household until the time that Abiathar was removed and that all came to fulfillment and to fruition. I wonder if Ravi would have lived longer had he, well, first of all, had he not done any of it. Had he confessed it when given the opportunity to confess it, when confronted with it. Just curious. I don't know. That may have been his time to die no matter what, whatever was going on. But I wonder if God would have lengthened his days if he would have continued to walk in his ways and kept his statutes in all those areas, including in the area of sexual sin. It's a curious thing. So, this is what God promises him. Walk in the ways of your father David, then I will lengthen your days. David had those sexual sins too, remember? But he was still faithful to God through it all. Verse 15, and Solomon awoke, and behold, it was a dream. Then he came to Jerusalem and stood before the ark of the covenant of the Lord and offered up burnt offerings and peace offerings and made a feast for all his servants. You know that we're about to get into a story of two women, as it's normally put, and one baby, right? But it's very clear at the beginning of this in verse 16 of 1 Kings chapter 3, it is two prostitutes that come in, right? And Solomon still deals very wisely with them. That area of sexual sin is a curious one when you read through the Old Testament. It's almost as though, it can almost feel as though it's being excused because God doesn't seem to be jumping on it and punishing it and calling people out for it, like he does with other sins that go on. Like he did with Saul and the sacrifice that he made that was unlawful, that like he did with David after Uriah was killed. He doesn't seem, even then, I mean, he did call him out for Bathsheba and the adultery that was going on, but not for the wives that he had otherwise. In fact, he even says, I gave you all these wives, I would have given you 10 times as much. It's a very clear and obvious thing, and it's so jarring, I think, to us when we hear about things like this, like what Ravi did, when we look at David, when we look at Solomon. By the way, two of the most prolific writers of the scriptures, which in the New Testament, who is it that Paul calls all scripture God-breathed, profitable for instruction, for reproof? Yeah, including what David and Solomon wrote. So God still uses those people. And sometimes I wonder if he doesn't let those consequences just be their own consequences, because they are very open, and very clear. And sometimes he does punish them, obviously. But in the case of something like an unfaithfulness to God, not trusting him, something like even anger or bitterness, an unforgiving spirit, things like that, it can be harder to understand when that is coming into our lives. And so sometimes I think God directly addresses that even more and punishes that because it's not so easy to see. So may we be careful of that. May we not elevate one sin above another as though it's so much worse because we can see the consequences so much more readily. All sin is terrible. In fact, the ones that we don't know about as much are the ones that we need to be doubly careful of. Moving on, 1 Kings chapter 3, verse 16, then 2 prostitutes came to the king, King Solomon, and stood before him. The one woman said, "O my lord, this woman and I lived in the same house, and I gave birth to a child while she was in the house. Then on the third day after I gave birth, this woman also gave birth, and we were alone. There was no one else with us in the house. Only we two were in the house. And this woman's son died in the night because she lay on him. And she arose at midnight and took my son from beside me, while your servant slept, and laid him at her breast, and laid her dead son at my breast. When I rose in the morning to nurse my child, behold, he was dead. But when I looked at him closely in the morning, behold, he was not the child that I had borne. But the other woman said, No, the living child is mine, and the dead child is yours. The first said, No, the dead child is yours, and the living child is mine. Thus they spoke before the king. That may sound kind of odd that they didn't even know which child was theirs or couldn't readily recognize this is not my child. But remember, prostitutes probably slept with many, many men, and may have had more children before that, don't know. At any rate, they couldn't tell right away which child was which. Who knows, could have been the same father as well. At any rate, that's not said here explicitly, specifically, whatever that word is. So I'm not going to say any more about that. Try not to say any more or less than what it says. Verse 23, then the king said, the one says, this is my son that is alive, and your son is dead. The other says, no, but your son is dead, and my son is the living one. And the king said, bring me a sword. So a sword was brought before the king. And the king said, divide the living child in two, and give half to the one and half to the other. Then the woman whose son was alive said to the king, because her heart yearned for her son, O my lord, give her the living child, and by no means put him to death. But the other said, he will be neither mine nor yours, divide him. Then the king answered and said, give the living child to the first woman, and by no means put him to death, she is his mother. And all Israel heard of the judgment that the king had rendered, and they stood in awe of the king, because they perceived that the wisdom of God was in him to do justice. He didn't leave it as it was. He didn't try to decide between one or the other. He didn't actually cut the child in half. He wanted justice, and he got justice. And that's a good and wonderful thing, a very wonderful thing. And what we see here is, again, between these two prostitutes, Israel being evil to each other. That happens. We are not good to each other all the time. In this case, it was very evil. I'm not even sure how you sleep on your own child. My wife assures me that's practically an impossibility. Without many other things going wrong or many other issues happening. At any rate, they're being evil to each other. They're prostitutes. He has to discern between that. In some cases, no wonder he asked for wisdom, understanding who the people were and what kind of things could happen among them and what he would need to decide. And God gave him that. God gave him what he asked for, and it was manifest. Pretty early on, he was already a man of wisdom. David saw that before he died. So it was a good thing, and he asked for more of it, knowing that that was going to lead him in the best way to be a good leader, a good ruler. Something interesting about Solomon. He wrote Proverbs 26:11, which says, like a dog that returns to his vomit is a fool who repeats his folly. This man, full of wisdom, he wrote about the dangers of following after strange women, foreign women. He wrote about the good things that you should follow after and how you should keep God first. And yet, he still returned to his folly and kept repeating his folly. So it's not so much that it's easy to stay away from, but it's easier to know it, to know what is right, to know what is wrong, than it is to actually stay away from those things that are wrong, stay away from the folly that we have. As wise as he was, he could still be foolish. And that's the same for all of us. So may we walk with mercy and grace, even as we think about someone like Ravi Zacharias, who clearly had great faults, but may we walk with mercy. Because I don't want to be one of those justice for you, mercy for me kind of people. If I want it to be for me, with whatever measure you judge someone else, it will be judged back to you in the same measure, right? I want it to be judged back to me in the same measure. I do want mercy. And I understand that those who sinned have mercy through Christ. They have forgiveness through Christ. And that can be hard for us to discern sometimes. That can be hard for us to deal with sometimes, because we want to see justice. It is good. It does feel good to see justice. You know what? If we want to see justice, again, we look to the cross and we see what it is that Christ did on that cross. That God executed justice for all of us on his Son, the ultimate justice. Doesn't mean we don't have consequences here, still, through this life, and when we do things wrong, but that justice, that ultimate justice, it is there. Just let's keep looking to the cross. And next time we will continue to see how Solomon continues to do trust in God.